We need to address these difficulties. Some of you read something like this or you hear something like that and you're like, you see, this is why I don't go to church. This is why I don't read the Bible. It's socially oppressive, it devalues women, and it endorses slavery. Clearly, all of this is a hoax. Now, I want to begin by saying I understand the reaction. I do. I don't agree with the conclusion, though, that the Bible's actually advocating for all of this stuff. And I want to give you something really, really, really important as you read the Bible. Sometimes the Bible is merely descriptive when we think it's prescriptive, meaning it's sharing what happened, not what should happen. Just because it's talking about all of this doesn't mean that this is what God intended. In fact, it's quite the opposite in this text. They take matters in their own hands and everything starts spiraling out of control. That's one of the consistent messages we read throughout the Bible, is that when we try it our way, things kind of fall apart. God often comes in the middle of a very broken system. Very broken system. This is not God's ideal. And when you find yourself in reading through places like this, you have to kind of deconstruct the text a little bit to understand what was going on. This was thousands and thousands of years ago in an extremely inhospitable world, especially to women who had lost everything. This is an Egyptian woman outside of Egypt. We don't know what happened to her, but it's likely that she lost everything in her family. And instead of being a lonely woman on her own in the middle of a very inhospitable place for a woman, it would have been easier for her to say, you know what, I'm gonna sell myself to someone who's got a whole lot of means, because it's better to be a slave to someone who's got stuff than to be on my own where I can get taken advantage of. This was broken. Everything about this story is broken. God's not advocating for it. The trajectory of the Bible completely condemns not only this kind of oppression, but slavery in particular. The people of Israel were led out of slavery because that was not what God's plan was. When they were given the law, inside the law are things on human dignity, human rights that should be applied to every single person. When Jesus sacrificed, he became a servant, a suffering slave for us so that he would set us free. That was God's intention. And then one of the followers of Jesus, a man by the name of Paul, wrote a letter to a guy named Philemon who in the first century had a slave, and he says, not anymore. I don't want you to treat him as a slave anymore. I want you to treat him as a beloved brother. The whole trajectory here was not slavery. It doesn't endorse that, even though in America we have a history of people who called themselves Christians and endorsed slavery based on the Bible. They didn't read it right. The whole trajectory was freedom. In fact, that's what led men like William Wilberforce in England to not only dedicate his life based on his faith in Jesus Christ to the abolition of slavery, but when people slammed him in England because that was socially unacceptable to advocate for the abolition of slavery, when they slammed him for being religiously fanatical, this is how he responded. He says, if to be feelingly alive to the sufferings of my fellow creatures is to be a fanatic, I'm one of the most incurable fanatics ever permitted to be at large. That wasn't despite his faith, that was because of his faith. Because he knew how to read the Bible.